You ever wonder why people are afraid of failing? That's a question worth asking, because if you're scared of failure, you can't succeed at anything. I mean, I know I've been there before. I'm sure most of you have too. But it turns out most people don't fear failing. They fear something else entirely. Now, this might seem like a tough concept to swallow, but stick with me here, because we're going somewhere special. According to psychologist Alfred Adler, everyone has a kind of inferiority complex. We all feel inferior in some way or another, whether we admit it or not. Some will rise above feelings of inferiority, while others may become overly superior. And according to Adler, superiority is just another word for arrogance. And that's the thing that makes it so dangerous. See, when you're arrogant, you always think you're right. You always think you're better than everyone else. And that often means you do not listen to anyone else's opinion, because you do not think it matters. You cut people off mid-sentence. You don't apologize when you screw up. And that leads to all sorts of problems. You don't make friends easily. You get in fights with strangers. Your boss writes you up. Your spouse gets a divorce lawyer. You find yourself living alone in a one-bedroom apartment, eating nothing but takeout food because no one else wants to eat your cooking. And then one day, you look in the mirror and you realize you are fat and ugly, and you start crying because no one loves you, and you ask yourself why. And the honest answer is, well, you did it to yourself. But that's not all. According to psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, the person who's arrogant enough to never admit they're wrong also cannot admit their weaknesses. So they become stuck with all the baggage they refuse to address. They refuse to forgive themselves for screwing up. They can't let go of their mistakes, all of which creates all sorts of neuroses. But neuroses are only the beginning. Adler believed that everyone who harbors an inferiority complex is also secretly envious of everyone else. And when that happens, he said, you'll always find yourself competing with others, trying to win, trying to keep up with the Joneses, trying to prove yourself. Now, if that sounds like you, stick with me, because this gets worse. According to Adler, the person who lives life this way, the person who is consumed with envy and pride and arrogance, they live a life full of self-hatred. Now, most people don't want to hear that, especially if it's true. But when that's the case, when you hate yourself, Adler believed the only way to escape that hatred is by escaping into the world of make-believe. And make-believe usually comes in two flavors. Either you escape into the make-believe that you're better than you really are, or you escape into the fantasy that everyone else is worse than you are. In either case, though, you live a life full of discontent. You're never happy. You're never satisfied. You're trapped inside yourself. And that's where Friedrich Nietzsche comes in. See, Nietzsche realized that many of his contemporaries were caught in the same trap. People who were intelligent, people who were talented, people who had all the potential to do great things. But instead of embracing the world and taking action, they refused to leave their comfort zone. And as a result, they failed to become the best version of themselves. So Nietzsche wrote a book about it called Twilight of the Idols. And in it, he outlined a way out. He called it the idea of self-overcoming. Basically, Nietzsche argued that we all have two sets of instincts, our lower instincts and our higher instincts. Our lower instincts are our selfish instincts. They're the ones that demand immediate gratification. Our higher instincts are the ones that help us delay gratification. Those are the instincts that require patience and restraint and sacrifice. Well, obviously, Nietzsche thought we should follow our higher instincts, but here's the rub. Our lower instincts don't care what we think. They still demand what they want, and they won't stop demanding it until we give it to them. Which means that if we follow our hearts, we'll fail. We'll fail at everything. So how do we get around that? Nietzsche believed the key was to use our higher instincts to tame our lower instincts. That was his idea of self-overcoming. Unfortunately, not everyone wants to overcome themselves. Not everyone wants to tame their lower instincts. Some of us would rather embrace them. And that's exactly what happens when we allow ourselves to become victims of our own mediocrity. See, we're not cowards. We know that deep down we don't want to die. But some of us love the idea of being martyrs. We love the idea of dying for a cause. And when that happens, we say things like, "Oh, I wish I could die," or "I wish I never existed." But Nietzsche says that's just make-believe. And make-believe only takes you so far, because eventually reality catches up with you, and then you are left holding the bag. That's what happened to a friend of mine named John. John was a talented writer. He was one of those guys who could write a term paper the night before it was due and ace it. He could walk into a room and captivate everyone with his charm and wit. And he knew all this. He knew he was smart. He knew he was funny. But he hated himself anyway. And the more he tried to escape that hatred, the deeper he fell into despair. When John was 24, he attempted suicide. Thankfully, he didn't finish the job. But after that, his mental health deteriorated. He dropped out of college. He moved from city to city. He took odd jobs here and there. And for a while, life looked bleak indeed. And then he read Nietzsche, and it gave him hope because Nietzsche taught him that he was destined to live a life of despair. Nietzsche showed him that he could escape his hatred. All he had to do was overcome himself. At first, that meant simply showing up to work every day. It meant showing up for his friends. It meant keeping his appointments. These were small victories, but they were important. Slowly, but surely, John began to reclaim his life. He found a therapist and he began working through his issues. He reconnected with old friends and he made new ones. He started dating again. And for a while, John felt like he was finally free. That lasted a few years. Then one day, John got a phone call from his sister. She told him that their father had fallen ill and asked if he could come home to help take care of him. Of course, he agreed. And when he got home, he realized that his father was terminally ill. John stayed home for 3 months, helping his mom and dad take care of him. But after their father died, John felt lost again. He moved back to the city, got a new job, and began seeing a new therapist. And during one of those sessions, he told her about his fear that he was doomed to fail, that he wasn't worthy of happiness, that he didn't deserve any of the good things that had come his way. And the therapist looked at him and she said, "John, you aren't afraid of success. You're afraid of failing at success." John didn't understand what she meant at first, so she explained it to him. She said, "John, you're not afraid of losing everything. You're afraid of having lost everything. You see, John, when you lose something, when you suffer a setback, it doesn't really matter why you lost. What matters is what you do about it. Do you throw in the towel? Do you give up? Or do you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and try again? Because if you're honest with yourself, you don't fear losing. You fear giving up." And that's when John understood. He realized that he wasn't afraid of losing everything. He was afraid of losing himself. He was afraid of losing control. He was afraid of becoming weak. And that's when he decided to fight. He decided to keep going. And that's when he started writing again. But if you think that story has a happy ending, you're kidding yourselves. It doesn't. You see, when Nietzsche said that we should overcome our lower instincts, he didn't promise that it would be easy. Nietzsche was a philosopher. He wasn't a miracle worker. So if you think John's story has a happy ending, you're kidding yourselves. It doesn't. Life is hard. It's messy. There are setbacks and disappointments and failures. And according to Nietzsche, that's the point. That's what life is about. It's about overcoming these obstacles, about rising above your circumstances, about taming your lower instincts. And yeah, maybe sometimes that means fighting back against fate. But even when fate wins, Nietzsche believed it's still worth fighting. Even if you're destined to lose, you still have to fight the good fight. And that's why Nietzsche ended his book, Twilight of the Idols, with the following. He wrote, "The individual has his goals, his inclinations, his flights, his frustrations, his loves, his hates, his desires, his fears, his dreams, his illusions, with all of which the eternal recurrence makes no reckoning. He wills his own way. God wills his way. What then is the third? Dare I speak of it? Is there really a third? Will? Behind the two wills, behind the will to power of the individual, and that of God, another will, the will of the earth, that mighty nature who wills itself to be all.